younger people today have a much more sophisticated power analysis than we did when we were coming up. And
Oh
so
yeah.
I appreciate that power analysis that they have, because make no mistake about it, what happens in our communities and the decisions that people make downtown about us is all about power, and understanding where they get their power and how their power can be threatened is extremely important. And I think these young folks are all about it.
I'm inspired by you being so hopeful, and I think you're right that our future is with the young people. And in a few seconds, we're going to ask Queenie and Thomas to join us, two members of our Youth Advisory Council, and they have their own questions. I also want to remind viewers that you're welcome to text in your in the chat, text in your questions for James, and we'll try to address them live. Queenie and Thomas, please feel free to bring in your questions. Do you have anything that you'd like to add now? Go ahead, Thomas.
Hi, James. Hi, Dean. First of all, I'm really inspired by both of you. So the first question that Queenie and I came up with is, what are sort of the differences you're seeing in youth POC solidarity movements now, the solidarity of our elders?
So, if I understood the question, Thomas, it is what solidarity am I seeing among youth in Black, Indigenous, and people of color movement? Yes.
Yeah, so sort of how has it evolved over time, and what are youth doing now differently that maybe our elders did differently?
Right. So it's very interesting. So to me, I think that our leadership back in the day was much more hierarchical. And I'd have to say that basically, in terms of LGBTQ issues, they were kind of like not spoken. Now, there were gay people in the movement, but it wasn't like they were identified as having their own movement in the movement, kind of thing. And so ours was very hierarchical. The leader was the leader. You know what I mean? It was just like Huey Newton was the leader of the Black Panther Party, and Huey Newton was the leader, and everybody else kind of responded to that. And I have friends that started Black Lives Matter. So Patricia Cullors and Alicia Garza are friends of mine, and I'm in touch with them all the time. And the thing that gets me the most about them is how decentralized they are. So movements today with social media, which I'm not on because I'm old, um, um, there's no way that you can keep centralized movements with social media. Everybody can do everything everywhere. And so to me, what is happening, and I love the solidarity, is how people are being decentralized, but they are still organizing around ways. And so in the Bay Area, the organizing may be very different than it is in LA. And it may be very different than it is in Stockton and Fresno. But folk in Stockton and Fresno are still organizing. There are ways to be in touch. And so I think that young people are much more decentralized in terms of who makes the call, who's in authority, who says this is what we're going to do, what we put our name on, than we were. And so, I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, in some way, I believe in this kind of centralized hierarchy because I'm like, well, what are we doing? And what do they say we're doing? And in another way, it's just ridiculous because if the leader is stupid, then that doesn't make any sense either. And so I just think that this whole decentralized way of organizing is something that we as older people can learn from the younger people. But also, what I also say to younger people is, y'all ain't been around but 20 years. There's a lot of stuff that we know that we can help with. And so, what I believe is important is that the elders and the young people work collectively, that we work in this way that is equitably and that we all help each other in this way. So that is what I see, is that we can say, don't make the mistakes we made, but young people can say, but yeah, the way you guys did it ain't exactly working now. We should do it this way. And I think that I think that's how we're best effective.
Queenie, did you want to add a question for James?
Yeah, echoing Thomas. Hi, Dean. Hi, James. It's really nice to be able to talk to you both today. So the second question that we have, kind of following that, is how have the wedge issues that are meant to split solidarity efforts evolved over time, and what is the climate of wedge issues in the Black and the API youth communities today?
Dean, I don't want to do all the talking. Did you want to take that, or you
Sure,
want me to take
you
that?
do all the talking, James.
Okay. So I think that the wedge issues are those issues in terms of whose struggle is whose struggle, meaning are we all a part of each other's struggle? And so I think it is, this whole notion of who, the oppression Olympics. Who is more oppressed than whom? Where do you live? What do you have? And that can be not only um, between ethnicities, that can be intra ethnic, kind of beef. And so my sense is this: is that it should not be the question should not be prove to us how down you are with our struggle, or is our struggle your struggle. I think, and this is where I think elders can be helpful to young people, is that what are our values? What do we believe? If we have the same values, right? If we believe that people should all have a place to live, if we believe that every child matters and should get a quality education, if those are the values that we believe in, then we are all each other's struggle. And so it doesn't matter who's down with whom. It is, do we have these values, and how is it that we best support each other to have these values? And I just think that that's where we start, because it's so easy to find ways in which we're different. In the previous segment, I talked about othering and belonging. And I think that every time anybody in a movement, in a solidarity movement, begins to other people, then you are essentially, you are essentially copying what those in power do. And so I just think that we have to make sure we don't other, and then to say, how do we get people to belong? How is it that we get folks to belong? And I'll give you a specific example. The work I do is to try to deconstruct the justice apparatus. And those are the most entrenched institutions in our country, because they were created to protect the haves from the have-nots. So we deal with law enforcement, we deal with probation, we deal with district attorneys. I mean, we deal with the tip of the spear of social control. Now, when we deconstruct those places, who are many of the people that have those jobs? They're people of color. If you're going to deconstruct a bureaucracy in San Francisco, you're going to be engaging with Filipinos. Why? Because government couldn't discriminate. So how could somebody that was Filipino get a job in the Department of Real Estate in the city and county of San Francisco? Because they couldn't be discriminated against, whereas the private enterprises could. Who works up at the jail, 850 Bryant Street? A lot of them are Black and brown people, because they didn't get discriminated against. So here's what I mean by values. So while I'm trying to deconstruct the systems that these Black and brown and Native people and Asian people work in, I also have to understand that they are Black and brown middle class. They want those jobs. They've sent their kids to college on those jobs. Those jobs have pensions. They're in SEIU. They're in unions. And so the question is, what are the values that we can agree upon in order to say that we shouldn't be brutalizing people in order to keep them safe? And I'm sure that you didn't take those jobs to be heartless, thoughtless bureaucracies. You took those jobs to better your family, to better yourself. And so the question is, how do we interact with labor to deconstruct a system that is oppressive? And how do you have those conversations with them so that they say, yeah, I didn't get in this job to be oppressive, but I damn sure got in this job to buy a house and send my kids to college. So what is our values that we can meet on that street?
Thomas and Queenie, those are amazing questions. I don't think from our point of view that much has changed with young people and organizing work and collaborations. But things are working against you. We have a more segregated society today. We've segregated our schools. We're segregating our housing. There's not as much opportunity for cross-cultural connections. You have to really go out of your way to make those connections. Whereas, back in the day, it was all about the neighborhood, and the neighborhood was diverse. It's very difficult to find those diverse neighborhoods in the Bay Area because of the cost of living, and because of predatory lending and things like that. But I think the other pressure that seems to be put on young people today is just the level of competition. We've always had to compete for the few crumbs, as people always said, right? There's a few jobs, a few opportunities, a few slots in law school, in med school, at UC or whatever. And it's always the people of color that have to fight for those crumbs. And you all are in such a pressure cooker of competition, much more so than I think James and I were, in terms of getting good grades, getting out of high school, getting into the right high school so that you can get into the right college. And those things pit us against each other. So we have to kind of work against that type of mentality where it's not about competing with each other or other races or other ethnicities. It's about the values that James is talking about. So what are the values that we have in common? And let's work from those values. There's a question from the audience, James. The current debate over the defund the police movement is supported by a large number of youth of color, but it's causing conflict within the progressive kind of movements over its effectiveness in addressing racial justice issues. Does the slogan matter? Defund the police. How can young people address conflicts within the movement and still work together?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It is something that's been, I'm in the process of writing a book, and the section that I'm writing now is on law enforcement and the police and prosecutors. And so I appreciate this question. So any slogan is just made out of frustration and oftentimes aspiration. It is not a blueprint. And so when people say defund the police, they mean defund the worst elements of custody, control, and suppression, and treating our communities like an armed camp. It does not mean we don't want any kind of policing. And so what happens is that people take the sentiment and they distort it, because police have been around since the 1830s in the United States, publicly, and privately if you've heard of Wells Fargo, if you've heard of Brinks, and if you've heard of Pinkerton, those were all the private police before the governments created police departments in the 1830s. And so there's always been some sense of we need community safety. The question that defund the police begs is the current structure that is supposed to deliver us safety delivering on what it's supposed to do? And what they're saying by defund the police is no, it's not delivering us safety. It's only delivering us suppression and domination. And it invites the question, if you want to hear it, it invites the question, and if we don't like what we have now, what can we imagine as to how to do it differently? And I think about the same question as aspirational. When Ta-Nehisi Coates, in the Atlantic Monthly article calling for reparations for Black people, when he wrote that article about why Black people should have reparations, you would have thought that he just screamed and yelled and was saying the most ridiculous stuff on the planet. He was just suggesting it as an idea. People took it, twisted it, said, why are we going to pay Black people money? I wasn't around. All the arguments you hear about it. And then what you begin to hear now is some cities are actually taking that question seriously. It's like now that we've learned more. And so this question of defund the police is just an invitation, like Black Lives Matter, to actually start a conversation about the way it's being done now is unacceptable to us, and it invites a conversation of how we would do it differently. And so that's to me what those slogans are. And once again, to go from other to belonging, to say, okay, whether I agree with that slogan or not, let's talk about what would we create as an alternative to the police the way we know it now.
Thomas, Queenie, I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask some final questions. Anything else that you would like to bring up?
Just one last question. What are maybe some of the most memorable or notable moments and struggles from your participation in liberation movements as well as your careers? And do you have any further advice for future generations of activists like Queenie and I?
Wow, that's a
I'll
tough
tell you
one.
what, real quick. I was involved in, as was Dean, in anti-apartheid work. And it just seemed so impossible when Nelson Mandela was locked up for 27 years. The white minority government in South Africa was in control of everything, and they had worldwide support. I just never thought that those little demonstrations we had down Market Street and asking the University of California to defund their investments in South Africa, when I saw Nelson Mandela walk out of jail, I just couldn't believe how these small efforts amounted to something. And the other thing quickly is when I got to meet, Fred Korematsu and people who were in concentration camps who sought and got legal redress for what this government did to them, to meet that gentle, tiny man who was so dignified and so powerful was a moment for me as well.
Thank you, everybody. I think we're just about out of time. Before we leave, I wanted to make sure that we understood the significant and fantastic work that James Bell is doing with the W. Hayward Burns Institute. James, if you want to recap, I know that you're reworking Youth Guidance Center in San Francisco to do away with the antiquated juvenile justice system. And I understand that you're also going to take over the Los Angeles County system and do the same type of work there. Do you have a few words to describe the impact of that work?
Sure, quickly. Because of young people organizing, They forced over 5 years, not instantly, the Board of Supervisors in Los Angeles to totally redesign their probation department. They said the probation department was using pepper spray and that they just weren't getting the kind of results. They asked us to redesign it. And with young people and community folks, we've come up with a design that is humane, that is restorative, and not punitive for the largest probation department in the country, a $500 million department with 3,500 employees. And similarly, in San Francisco, the Board of Supervisors here, I invite everybody to follow what's going to go on between now and December next year. San Francisco is going to be the first city in the country to close their juvenile detention facility, not to relocate it, not to close it and open up something else, but to literally close it so that when kids get picked up, they'll no longer be taken to juvenile hall. And we are creating a whole new way of where and how we deal with young people. And that will be done by December of next year. So I invite you to keep track of what we're doing, and lend your voice. Join the process of what's happening. And so both of these are history making and very innovative things that we're doing, and as a result of people getting together and asking for a new way of being.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and through our series of conversations. Please check out our website. You can view recordings of the 3 conversations through our website links. I want to thank all of our sponsors and supporters. We still have a few weeks before the end of the year that you can pull a donation for API Legal Outreach or even the W. Hayward Burns Institute, and help support the work we're trying to do. James, it's great to hear from you, to see you. Understand that you're writing memoirs or something. Are we going to see that on Amazon, or what's happening with that?
We'll see. It'll happen next year if it happens.
Okay. Thank you to Queenie and Thomas for their participation. I want to thank the Tiny Cast Company, Felicia and Scott, for their expert production. We're going to possibly continue some conversations in the near future due to popular demand, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with viewer interest. We want to ask you all to stay healthy and safe during the holidays, but to enjoy the holiday season as much as you can. And thanks again for joining us. Good night.